Have you ever found yourself holding your breath, waiting for your grown child, to make a decision, and before you know it, you've already stepped in to do it for them? Maybe it started with something small, a bill they forgot to pay, a car problem they didn't handle, a breakup that left them in pieces. And your first instinct, of course, was to help, because you're their parent. That's what we do, right? But now you're noticing something. They don't quite stand on their own. They ask for advice but never really take it. They delay decisions, avoid responsibility, and worst of all, they look to you for things they should be handling themselves. And you wonder, am I helping too much? This isn't an easy question to ask, especially when you've spent most of your life being there for them. Raising children is no small thing. You fed them, guided them, sat by their side through tears and fevers, bad dreams and broken hearts. You gave everything, and you'd do it all over again in a heartbeat. But now that they're grown, the rules have changed, and nobody tells us that part. You don't stop loving them just because they're taller, or because their birthdays start with the number 3 or 4. But love in adulthood asks for something different. And that's where things get complicated. The great psychologist once said that what we don't resolve inside ourselves, we repeat, in patterns, in relationships, especially in families. What we think is helping sometimes isn't love at all. Sometimes it's fear in disguise. The fear of not being needed. The fear of being left behind. The fear that if we stop helping, we'll stop mattering. Let's pause here for a moment. Because if you're feeling a little uncomfortable, maybe even a little defensive, that's okay. This is not about blame. It's about truth. And truth is the first step towards something better. The parent-child bond is one of the deepest and most complex relationships we'll ever experience. And it doesn't just shape the child, it shapes the parent too. In the early years, that closeness is everything. A baby needs constant care. A toddler looks to you for every answer, every reassurance. You become their world. And they become the reason you get up in the morning. But time moves forward. And if we don't allow that bond to evolve, it can quietly become a trap. What started as love slowly shifts into control, even if we don't mean it. We keep giving, they keep taking, and before we know it, both sides feel stuck. You see, true maturity, emotional, spiritual, psychological, can't grow in the shadow of constant rescue. A child who never struggles won't learn how to stand. A child who's always shielded from pain won't know their own strength. And here's the hard part. Every time you step in too quickly, you may be sending an invisible message. I don't believe you can do this without me. Now, I know that's not what you mean. You step in because you love them, because you want to ease their burden. But deep inside, you might also be trying to soothe your own worry. The worry that if they fall, they'll get hurt. Or maybe even more quietly, that if they stop needing you, they might stop calling, stop coming by, stop including you in their life. But what if the opposite is true? What if letting go, really letting go, is the very thing that creates closeness again? Imagine this. A son in his 30s, smart, capable, but every time a job offer comes up, he calls his mother for reassurance. He asks, "Do you think I can handle this?" And she says, "Let me look over the contract first." What sounds like care is actually avoidance. He's avoiding responsibility. And she's avoiding her fear of being left out of his next chapter. This isn't rare. It happens in all kinds of families, across generations and cultures. And most of the time, it's not because the child is incapable. It's because the emotional contract between them says, "I will continue to need you, and you will continue to rescue me." Some psychologists have a name for this: symbiotic dependence. It's when both people unconsciously agree to keep each other stuck. The parent stays important. The child stays small. And while it looks like closeness, it's really a quiet form of control. No one grows. No one becomes whole. And here's the heartbreaking part. Most parents caught in this pattern feel exhausted. They don't feel appreciated. They feel tired, sometimes resentful, but they don't know how to stop. Because stopping feels like abandonment, like failure, like being a bad parent. Let me tell you something right now. Letting your child face their own challenges is not abandonment. It's a gift. It's not cold, it's courageous. And it might be the single most loving thing you can do. Because the truth is, there's no confidence without difficulty, no identity without risk, no resilience without pain. When you give them the space to try, to fall, to figure things out, you're not stepping away. You're stepping aside so they can step forward. And yes, they might fall. But falling isn't the end of the story. In fact, it might be the beginning of their own. You don't stop being a parent when you stop fixing things. You become a new kind of parent, a guide, a supporter, a witness to their becoming. You go from being the one who holds the umbrella to being the one who lets them learn how to walk in the rain. Because one day, you won't be there to hold the umbrella, and they need to know they'll be okay anyway. This kind of love requires grief. The grief of letting go of the child who needed you for everything. The grief of not being the hero anymore. But that grief isn't empty. It clears the way for something deeper. For respect. For adult connection. For admiration that runs both ways. It's not too late. Whether your child is 25 or 45 or even 60, the shift can begin with you. It starts with small changes. Holding back when you normally would jump in. Asking them what they think instead of telling them what to do. Saying, I trust you to figure this out, even if part of you is afraid they won't. You are not being selfish. You are being brave. It's often believed that behind every behavior, there's a motive, something deep in the unconscious that drives us. Sometimes helping too much is not about kindness. It's about our need to feel important, needed, safe. But you don't need to be needed to be loved. You can be loved for who you are, not just for what you do. So take a breath, take a step back, and trust that the child you raised, imperfect, flawed, learning, is capable of becoming their own person. Not in spite of you, but because of you. Because you gave them not just your help, but your belief. And if right now your heart feels a little heavy, that's okay too. Growth is always a little uncomfortable, but it's also the doorway to something beautiful. Let's continue. So let's sit with this idea for a little longer. That helping, something we were taught is always a good thing, can sometimes quietly turn into harm. Not because our intentions are bad, but because our fears get in the way. I want you to think back for a moment. Maybe it was a time when your child made a decision you didn't agree with. Maybe they married someone you weren't sure about. Maybe they changed careers or moved across the country. And deep inside, you felt anxious, maybe even a little angry. Not because you didn't love them, but because it felt like you were being left out of the story. Like the control you once had was slipping away. That's a very human feeling. It's often said that the unconscious mind speaks not through words, but through patterns. It's those subtle behaviors, the repeated offers of help, the check-in calls that feel more like interrogations, the just-in-case money slipped into their hands, that reveal what's really going on beneath the surface. And most of the time, it's not about them. It's about us. Maybe we're afraid they'll struggle the way we once did. Maybe we feel guilty about things we wish we'd done differently. Maybe we're carrying our own regrets and trying to rewrite the ending through our children. Whatever it is, when we keep jumping in, we're not just interfering with their life. We're avoiding our own emotional work. Imagine a parent who always bails their adult child out of financial trouble. Maybe that child is 40 years old, but still hasn't learned how to budget or save. And every time a crisis hits, the parent wires money. Not just once. Again and again. On the outside, it looks generous. But over time, resentment builds. The parent feels drained. The child feels incapable. And nobody says it out loud, but both know something isn't working. Some would call this repetition compulsion, the unconscious reenactment of old wounds. Maybe that parent was never rescued when they were young, so now they rescue others to heal the part of themselves that once felt abandoned. Or maybe they were smothered by their own parents, and without realizing it, they're doing the same to their child. You see, we don't just pass down stories, we pass down patterns. And unless we become aware of them, we keep repeating them like actors in a play we never auditioned for. That's why awareness is such a powerful thing. It doesn't erase the past, but it gives us the freedom to write a new script. That freedom begins with boundaries. Now, I know that word can sound harsh, especially when you're from a generation where family meant sacrifice, where being a good parent meant giving everything, even when it hurt. But let me offer a different way to see it. Boundaries are not walls. They are bridges. They allow us to connect in healthier ways, to love without losing ourselves. A boundary might sound like, I know you're going through a hard time and I'm here to listen, but I'm not going to fix this for you. Or, I trust you to handle this, and if you need advice, not a solution, I'm here. It's not pushing them away. It's pulling them up. And yes, they may push back. They may say you've changed, that you don't care anymore, that you're being distant or cold. But that's just the growing pains of a relationship shifting into something more honest, more balanced. And if you hold steady, something surprising happens. They begin to grow. They begin to trust themselves. They begin to live. It's okay to miss the days when they needed you for everything, when their little hand would reach for yours and you knew exactly what to do. But now they need something else. They need your faith, not your fixes. Your presence, not your plans. That's the paradox of love. It sometimes asks us to step back when everything in us wants to step in. And if you're wondering whether it's too late, let me tell you, it never is. You could be 75 and your child could be 50, and still, the pattern can change. It starts with one moment, one pause before offering help, one honest conversation, one decision to trust them more than you fear for them. There's a quiet kind of strength in that, a dignity that comes from loving without controlling. And in that space, a new kind of closeness is born, one that doesn't rely on need, but on respect. One where your child sees you not just as a helper, but as a human being, complex, wise, and still growing. Because here's something we don't say enough. You're still allowed to grow too. Just because you're a parent doesn't mean you've finished becoming who you are. Many emotional blocks come not from age, but from unexamined patterns. When we step out of those patterns, even late in life, we don't just help our children become free. We free ourselves. And you deserve that. You deserve to feel light, to feel peaceful, to feel proud of the person your child is becoming without feeling like you had to carry them the whole way. Some of the most beautiful relationships between parents and adult children are built after the drama fades, after the urgency dies down, after both sides stop performing roles and start being real. And that realness, it's tender, sometimes messy, but it's also where the deepest love lives. Not the love that says, I will fix your life, but the love that says, I believe in your life, even when I'm not in the center of it. So if you're sitting with some heavy feelings right now, I want you to take a breath and let them come. Maybe there's sadness, maybe guilt, maybe even relief. That's okay. Those emotions are not wrong. They are part of the process of change. And change, no matter how old we are, begins with telling the truth. The truth that helping isn't always helpful. The truth that love sometimes wears the mask of fear. The truth that control and closeness are not the same. And most of all, the truth that letting go is not a loss. It's a gift. You have raised a person who is capable, even if they don't see it yet, even if they haven't shown it yet. It's there. The roots you planted run deep. And the greatest act of love now, is to stop holding the stem so tightly and let the flower reach for its own sun. You will still be there. Watching, supporting, loving, just not interfering. And that shift, quiet and strong, is the beginning of freedom for both of you. Now take a moment and think about this. What would it feel like to see your child make a decision completely on their own, without your guidance, without your money, without your safety net, and know in your heart that you didn't make it happen, but they did? What would it feel like to witness that and smile, not because they finally did it your way, but because they did it their way? That feeling, that quiet, proud moment, is one of the greatest gifts you can receive as a parent. But to get there, it requires something very few of us are ever taught: the courage to let go of being central, the humility to step back, the wisdom to see that helping too much may not be love. It may be your fear showing up in disguise. Now, I know letting go sounds simple in theory, but in real life, it's one of the hardest things you'll ever do. Not because you don't want your child to grow, but because growth means change. And change often brings distance. Maybe fewer phone calls, fewer requests, fewer chances to be the one they run to. And that can feel like loss. It can feel like love is slipping away. But the truth is, real love doesn't vanish in freedom. It deepens. It matures. In fact, it's only when both people in a relationship feel free that real love can exist. Not the love of dependence, not the love of duty, but the kind of love that's chosen, renewed, and alive. That's the love you deserve. But for that love to flourish, something else has to happen. And it's not always pretty. It's the confrontation. Not with your child, but with yourself. It's often said that behind every good intention lives a deeper motive. Sometimes the need to help comes from unresolved wounds we've never had the chance to name. Maybe we didn't get the support we needed growing up. Maybe we always felt second best. Maybe our own lives didn't turn out quite the way we hoped, and so we pour ourselves into our children, trying to fix through them what we couldn't fix in ourselves. This is not a flaw. It's a signal. It's your heart saying, "There's something in me that still needs healing." But here's the most important part. You cannot heal it through your child. No matter how much you love them, no matter how much you give, they cannot complete the story for you. That story is yours. And the moment you accept that is the moment you begin to reclaim yourself, not just as a parent, but as a person. And the same is true for your child. As long as you keep solving things for them, they won't feel the need to solve things on their own. As long as you keep stepping in, they'll keep stepping back. Not because they want to, but because the emotional contract says they must. Some children don't even realize this is happening. They live in quiet guilt. They hesitate before succeeding. They fear that becoming strong will somehow hurt you. So they stall. They underachieve. They play small, not because they are small, but because deep down, they sense that growing up fully might feel like betrayal. That is the invisible cost of overhelping. It creates guilt where there should be gratitude. It creates tension where there should be trust. But the good news is that pattern can be broken, not through force, not through lectures, but through gentleness, through choosing every day to trust the process of letting go. That might mean not offering unsolicited advice, even when you think you know better. It might mean holding back that offer to pay off their car or cover their rent, even if you can afford it. It might mean choosing to be silent while they make a mistake, even one you saw coming. That silence, it's not distance. It's love. It's the sound of a parent learning to let their child fall and trusting that they will rise. Because we don't grow in comfort. We grow in challenge. And there's no resilience without the risk of failure. This doesn't mean you disappear. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you start caring differently. True maturity is accepting that life is not about avoiding pain, but learning how to face it with strength. That applies not just to your child, but to you. Because letting go hurts. Watching someone you love struggle when you could step in, it aches. But it's that ache that allows something deeper to bloom. When your child finally stands tall, fully themselves, independent in spirit and clear in mind, you'll feel it. The quiet pride, the deeper connection, the unspoken thank you that comes not from your help, but from your faith. And that faith, it's a kind of legacy. It says, I raised you not to depend on me forever, but to discover who you are without me. That is not abandonment. That is love in its highest form. And if your child is resistant to this change, be patient. It's hard for them too. They've been used to a certain rhythm. They may push back. They may try to pull you in with guilt or fear. But if you stay steady, kind, and consistent, they will eventually feel the shift. And they'll start shifting too. This may take time, but it will take root. And here's the final truth I want to leave with you today. You are allowed to choose peace. You are allowed to have a life that's not built around solving other people's problems. You are allowed to sit in the stillness of your own soul and know that your worth is not measured by your usefulness. You've done more than enough. You've guided, nurtured, protected, carried, comforted, and sacrificed. And now your task is different. Now your task is to be. To stand beside, not in front. To hold space, not answers. To love not as a rescuer, but as a witness to their unfolding. Because when you give your child the room to grow, you give yourself the room to breathe. And in that breathing, you both become more whole. So if you've ever felt torn between love and boundaries, between helping and stepping back, between closeness and independence, I hope this brought some clarity. And if not clarity, then at least compassion. Because you're not alone in this. We all wrestle with these questions. They don't have simple answers, but they do have honest ones. You are not letting go of your child. You are letting go of control. And what takes its place is something richer, calmer, deeper than anything control could ever offer. And maybe, just maybe, this is how love was always meant to be. There comes a moment, quiet, often unexpected, when you realize you've been holding on too tightly. Not just to your child, but to a role, to an identity, to a sense of purpose that once defined you. And letting go of that isn't easy. It feels like stepping into unfamiliar ground. It feels like loss. But it's not the end of love. It's the beginning of a new kind of freedom. It's often understood that behind most of our behavior lies a deeper truth, one that's often hidden even from ourselves. When we help our children again and again, when we interfere in decisions they should be making on their own, we may believe we're acting from love, and in many ways, we are. But there's often something else at work too. A need to feel needed, a fear of being left behind, a longing to matter. And that's not shameful. That's human. The mistake isn't in having those feelings. The mistake is in pretending they don't exist, and then using our children to soothe them. When we do that, we don't just blur emotional boundaries. We start writing a story for them that they never asked for. And in that story, they never truly become themselves. So how do we begin rewriting that story? Not just for them, but for ourselves. It starts with seeing your child as they really are. A full-grown adult, capable of making choices, learning through failure, and growing through struggle. Not a reflection of your past, not a second chance at your own dreams, not an extension of your identity, but a human being, separate and whole. And it starts with seeing yourself differently too, not just as a parent, but as a person who still has their own becoming to do. Because life doesn't stop unfolding after 60. You are still allowed to rediscover yourself, to try new things, to explore what brings you joy, not just what brings your children stability. This can be the most liberating chapter of your life. One where you offer support without sacrifice. One where you love without control. One where you're present without being pulled into drama, that isn't yours to fix. Sometimes that means learning a new language of love. Instead of, "Do you need help?" it becomes, "I trust you've got this." Instead of, "Here's what I think you should do," it becomes, "What do you want for yourself?" Instead of, "Let me handle that," it becomes, "I'll be here if you need me, but I believe in your ability to figure it out." These small shifts change everything. They build trust, not dependence. They grow respect, not resentment. And they allow your child to rise into the fullness of who they are, not as your project, but as their own person. And yes, they may stumble. They may even fall hard. But that's not a failure of your parenting. That's life. That's learning. That's how we all grow. Your job now is not to shield them from pain. It's to walk beside them through it without trying to erase it. Because there is no maturity without suffering. There is no wisdom without discomfort. And there is no real identity until we stop relying on others to carry us. So what does this mean in practice? It might mean saying no to a request that once felt automatic. It might mean allowing silence where there used to be constant advice. It might mean watching them choose a path you wouldn't have chosen, and choosing, instead of fear, to trust. You're not turning away. You're tuning into a deeper kind of faith. And if guilt creeps in, as it often does, remind yourself of this. Letting your child face life doesn't make you cruel. It makes you honest. It makes you brave. It gives them the gift of becoming, and gives you the gift of peace. Because what so many parents over 60 are carrying isn't just the weight of responsibility, it's the weight of invisible obligation. The feeling that if you stop doing, you'll stop being important. That if you step back, you'll disappear from their life. But your presence has never been defined by your interference. You matter because of who you are, not because of what you fix. In fact, the more you allow your children to grow, the more likely they are to come back to you, not in desperation, but in appreciation. Not for rescue, but for reflection. And that kind of relationship, the kind rooted in mutual respect, is worth everything. There is a moment after all the advice has been given and the support has been offered, where you finally look at your child and say, with a full heart, "You don't need me the way you used to, and that's a good thing." That moment is not the end. It's a new beginning. It's the start of a chapter where you get to witness the fruits of your parenting, not through constant help, but through quiet presence, where your role shifts from rescuer to encourager, from director to observer, from fixer to friend. And in this chapter, you also get to reintroduce yourself to you, to the parts of yourself that were put on hold while raising a family, to the passions that never had time to flourish, to the quiet mornings and the unhurried afternoons that belong to no one else but you. You are not disappearing. You are returning to your wholeness. And as you do, something magical happens. Your children sense it. They begin to see you not just as a parent, but as a person. Not just as the one who always had the answers, but as someone wise enough to ask deep questions. Not just as a support system, but as a soul of your own. And they will love you more for that. Not out of need, but out of recognition. Not out of dependence, but out of respect. So let this be your gentle reminder. The best kind of love does not cling. It frees. It allows the people we care for to fall and rise, to make their own choices, to live out their own truths. And it allows us, in turn, to rest, to release, to find peace in knowing that we have done enough. If you're still watching this video, it means something in you is already changing. Maybe it's a memory, a longing, a sense that it's time to live differently. Whatever it is, trust it. Because change isn't a sign you did something wrong. It's a sign you're ready for what's next. So take that next step, with kindness, with courage, with love that doesn't hold too tight. Love that says, "I believe in you, even in silence." Love that whispers, "I will always be here," even from a gentle distance. And to anyone out there who has spent their life being the rock, the helper, the one who always made things better, I see you. I honor the weight you've carried. And I want you to know, you don't have to carry it forever. Let yourself rest. Let your children grow. And let love evolve into its most powerful form. The kind that doesn't rescue, but releases. The kind that trusts. The kind that frees. If this message touched something inside you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Speak about it. Comment below and tell us what stirred in you. Your words may help someone else finally put down what they've been carrying too. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel for more honest, healing conversations like this one. Because you matter. Your voice matters. And your journey isn't finished, not by a long shot. Here's to new beginnings. Here's to loving with strength. Here's to living with peace. And here's to letting go, not as a goodbye, but as a beautiful, courageous start.